coming up on the 26th of April from Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. In a bout that will be streamed worldwide on DAZN Pay-Per-View, we will finally see the long-anticipated showdown between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn. The history behind this rivalry is mighty interesting. Eubank Jr. is, of course, the son of Chris Eubank, former WBO champion at both middleweight and super middle. On the other side, Benn is the son of Nigel Benn, who also held the WBO belt at middleweight, and he was also the WBC super middleweight champion. These former two-division champions fought twice. First in 1990, when Eubank won the WBO middleweight title against Benn. Then they fought again in 1993, this time in a unification bout at super middleweight, where Eubank and Benn each retained their respective WBO and WBC titles after their rematch ended in a draw. The initial appeal for a fight between Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn was largely predicated on the success of each man's father, where the prospect almost acted like a quasi-continuation of their father's previous rivalry. The two sons were originally scheduled to fight on the 8th of October, 2022. Indeed, the fight was even billed as born rivals, validating the idea that the rivalry inherently originated from the rivalry in the previous generation. Benn was coming off of a second-round stoppage win against Chris Van Heerden earlier that year, and Eubank was coming off of a 12-round unanimous decision victory against Liam Williams. The stage was all set for the big-time showdown, but it didn't happen. Just a few days earlier, Benn reportedly tested positive for clomiphene, and the fight was, I guess, technically postponed. The next phase is a story in its own right, and at that time, boxing social media was flooded with all sorts of clever jokesters who all sounded almost exactly like that Vincent Price villain from the old Batman series. The long and short of it, after a suspension and all kinds of appeals and lifted suspensions and other legal matters, that was all ultimately resolved, which in some strange way has actually amplified the buildup, where the theme of testing positive for a banned substance has, in itself, become a key point of animosity between the two, which has helped to fuel fan interest. It all sort of shifted away from the prior generation and organically grew into something of its own, where the two have really been egging each other on. Since they were originally supposed to meet, Eubank has fought 3 times, the first of which saw him drop twice before being stopped in the 4th round against Liam Smith. Those two had an immediate rematch, and this time around, Eubank dropped Smith a couple of times before the ref had seen enough in the 10th. Most recently, Eubank dropped Camille Jeremeta 3 times, scoring a 7th round stoppage in that one. For his part, Benn has fought twice since then. First, he won a 10-round unanimous decision against Rodolfo Orozco, and then in his most recent bout, Benn won a 12-round unanimous decision against Peter Dobson, and that was the first time he'd ever been past round 10 in his professional career. Eubank is 35 years old and has spent his entire career campaigning at middleweight and super middleweight, 160 and 168. Eubank has more professional experience, and more importantly, he has more experience against higher-level opposition, and his opponents have been guys who are physically bigger than Benn. These are the 2 key advantages that Eubank brings into the fight: experience and size, both weight and height. Conor Benn is 28 years old and has spent the bulk of his career competing at welterweight, where his last 2 fights have been north of that, but he has never competed north of 154, with most of his fights being at 147. Benn has a style that can be explosive where he has shown decent power, albeit against smaller and generally lower-level opponents than those Eubank has consistently faced. The youth advantage is, at least on paper, the one and only key tangible edge that Benn has going in. The big question here, I think, is, will Conor Benn be powerful enough and explosive enough to get to an older Eubank in the same type of way that Smith did in their first bout? To be sure, Eubank looked mighty vulnerable during his demise against Smith. So the idea that the younger fighter moving up might be able to catch up with him and hurt him or stop him, it's not impossible. I do not think it is especially likely, however. Benn's show-stopping power was nowhere to be seen in his last two fights. And more concerning still, Benn was often looking a bit too easy to hit. Ultimately, Eubank bounced back from that stoppage loss against Smith, scoring a stoppage win of his own to even the score, where he looked really sharp in there. Then Eubank went in there and looked good again against Jeremeta last time out. So as to the question, is Benn good enough and explosive enough to get Eubank out of there like Smith did? If it is going to happen, I imagine it would probably happen earlier in the first half of the fight. But all things considered, specifically looking at the last two fights both of these guys had, perhaps the better question to ask here is whether or not Benn is good enough and durable enough to survive the distance against Eubank. After all, Eubank is more seasoned and experienced against higher level opponents, and he is accustomed to fighting at a heavier weight against heavier opponents. On the other hand, this fight will take place at the official middleweight limit at 160, but there is also a 10-pound rehydration clause in place, meaning neither guy can weigh in at more than 170 on fight night, which could potentially be problematic for the naturally bigger Eubank. These terms are certainly much better for Eubank than when they were originally supposed to fight, at a catch weight of 157, with an even stricter rehydration clause. So these terms are clearly better for him. All the same, putting a cap of 170 on Eubank could be exactly the type of thing that might allow Benn the chance to get to Eubank, where he could maybe unleash some serious game-changing firepower. I do not believe that is likely to happen. For my official prediction, I am taking Eubank by mid to late round stoppage, let's say round 7, where I believe Eubank will ultimately prove too big, too talented, and too experienced. I do believe that there will be an extremely high level of intensity and atmosphere, especially earlier on in the fight, where I expect both men to be highly motivated and ready to put forth a strong, spirited effort. But at the end of the day, I simply believe Eubank is bigger and better, and I am not expecting the rehydration limit to be the deciding factor in this one. I think Eubank will be able to separate himself and establish some momentum as things approach the halfway point, where I believe size, skills, and experience will win the day. So I am taking Eubank by 7th round stoppage, but as always, what the hell do I know? I ain't exactly Quasimodo over here. But this one has been very long in the making, and for a rivalry that has largely began on the shoulders of the success of each guy's father and their previous rivalry, this one has grown and evolved along the way in its own right, with some mighty strange twists and turns along the way, and I for one am looking forward to finally seeing it happen. Best of luck to both Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn. Saturday, the 26th of April. This will be Ring Magazine's first ever boxing card, Fatal Fury City of the Wolves. And the entire card will be available worldwide on DAZN. Enjoy the fight, everyone. Who do you think will win? Chris Eubank Jr. or Conor Benn? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you very much for watching and have a wonderful night. This is Rummy on the Ring from Rummy's Corner.
Oh, I am ecstatic.
You know, Quasimodo predicted all this.